was a year in Greek mythology when nothing grew. Not a single seed sprouted. Not a single crop matured. The earth, which had always given life freely, became barren overnight. Famine spread across the world like a plague. Animals died. Children starved. Entire civilizations teetered on the edge of extinction. And the gods, immortal and powerful as they were, watched from Olympus as humanity suffered and died, unable to intervene because the goddess responsible for all growth, all harvest, all life emerging from soil, had stopped. She had simply stopped. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, mother of agriculture, the deity who fed the world, walked away from her divine duties and let everything die. Not because she was evil, not because she was cruel, but because her daughter had been taken from her, stolen in broad daylight, dragged into the underworld by a god who wanted a queen. And Demeter made a choice that would echo through eternity. If she couldn't have her daughter, then the world couldn't have life. This is the story of a mother's grief so profound it nearly ended humanity. This is the story of the goddess who held the entire world hostage until she got what she wanted. This is the story of how love, pushed to its breaking point, becomes the most dangerous force in existence. Think about the power of that choice for a moment. Demeter wasn't threatening violence. She wasn't throwing lightning bolts or sending plagues or wielding any of the dramatic weapons that gods typically used when they wanted to make a point. She was simply refusing to do her job. She was on strike. And that simple act of refusal, that withdrawal of her labor, that decision to stop being the goddess of growth and harvest, was more devastating than any war Zeus had ever started or any storm Poseidon had ever conjured. Because everything, absolutely everything, depended on her. Civilization existed because Demeter allowed crops to grow. Humanity survived because she blessed the fields. Animals lived because she made grass and grain. She was the foundation beneath the foundation, the most essential deity in the entire pantheon, and nobody realized it until she stopped. Until the goddess who everyone took for granted, who received dutiful sacrifices but never dramatic worship, who existed in the background of every meal and every harvest festival without ever demanding the spotlight, decided that she was done playing by everyone else's rules. Before we understand Demeter's breaking point, we need to understand who she was before the breaking. She was born second, right after Hestia, another daughter of Kronos and Rhea. She was swallowed moments after her first breath, consumed by a father so terrified of prophecy that he ate his children rather than risk being overthrown. She spent her existence trapped in a titan's belly alongside her siblings, waiting in darkness for a freedom that might never come. And when Zeus finally freed them, when the war against the Titans began, Demeter fought. She was one of the 6 original Olympians, one of the gods who overthrew the cosmic order and established a new one. But unlike her siblings who immediately claimed domains of power and authority, Demeter chose something different. She chose the earth. Not the entire earth like Gaia, the primordial mother, but the cultivated earth. The fields, the farms, the places where humans worked the soil and coaxed life from dirt and seeds. Demeter invented agriculture. Or more accurately, she made agriculture possible by blessing it, by teaching humanity how to plant and harvest, by ensuring that seeds would sprout and crops would mature, and the cycle of growth and death and growth again would continue. Before Demeter, humans were hunter-gatherers, nomadic, following herds and foraging for wild foods. After Demeter, humans could stay in one place, could build cities, could develop civilization. Agriculture is the foundation of everything we think of as human progress. Writing, art, philosophy, science, all of it only possible because farming allowed populations to grow and specialize and dedicate time to things other than constant searching for food. And Demeter gave that gift freely. She didn't demand grand temples or elaborate worship. She just wanted people to remember her when they ate, to acknowledge that the bread on their table and the grain in their stores came from her blessing. She was, in every sense, the goddess of the unglamorous essential, the divine embodiment of the work that nobody notices until it stops. She had a daughter, Persephone, also called Kore, which simply means the maiden, the girl, the daughter who was everything to her mother. Demeter had other children from various liaisons with gods and mortals, but Persephone was special. She was born from Demeter's union with Zeus, which makes the whole story even more disturbing, even more complicated. Zeus was father to both the girl who was taken and complicit in the taking. Demeter raised Persephone away from Olympus, away from the politics and the drama and the dangerous games that gods played with each other. She kept her daughter close, sheltered, safe. They lived in the fields, among the crops, in a world of growth and seasons and the simple rhythms of planting and harvest. Demeter teaching, Persephone learning. Demeter protecting, Persephone growing. It was, by the standards of divine relationships, remarkably healthy, remarkably normal. A mother and daughter who actually loved each other, who chose each other's company, who built a life around mutual care and shared purpose. And then, one day, while Persephone was gathering flowers in a meadow, the earth opened. Hades emerged from the underworld in his chariot, grabbed the girl, and dragged her down into his realm before she could even scream for help. The earth closed behind them, and Persephone was gone. Just gone. One moment she was there, alive and bright and present. The next moment she was in the underworld, trapped in the one place her mother couldn't reach, claimed by a god her mother couldn't fight. And Demeter, who had been nearby, who should have been close enough to help, heard nothing, saw nothing, only realized something was wrong when she returned to the meadow and found it empty, found the flowers scattered, found her daughter missing without explanation, without trace, without any sign of where she'd gone or what had happened. Imagine that moment. The confusion turning to worry, the worry turning to panic, the panic turning to the kind of primal terror that only a parent who's lost a child can understand. Demeter searched. For 9 days and 9 nights, she wandered the earth, calling her daughter's name, asking everyone she encountered if they had seen a young girl, if they knew anything, if they could help. She didn't eat, she didn't sleep, she didn't tend to her divine duties or bless the fields or do any of the things that goddesses of the harvest were supposed to do. She just searched, desperately, frantically, with the single-minded intensity of a mother who knows her child is in danger and cannot rest until she finds her. And nobody would tell her the truth. The gods knew. Zeus knew because he'd approved the marriage. The other Olympians knew because news traveled fast among immortals. But nobody told Demeter. They let her search, let her suffer, let her tear herself apart with worry and grief while they stayed silent. Finally, Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft and crossroads, took pity on her. Hecate had heard Persephone's scream, had heard the moment when the earth opened and swallowed the girl. She told Demeter what she knew, told her to ask Helios, the sun god who sees everything from his chariot in the sky. And Helios, who had witnessed the abduction, told Demeter the truth. Hades had taken her daughter. Zeus had approved it. Persephone was in the underworld, married to the Lord of the Dead, beyond reach and beyond rescue. And Demeter, who had spent 9 days tearing the world apart looking for her daughter, who had held on to hope that maybe Persephone was just lost or hiding or scared, but alive and findable, learned that her daughter had been stolen, that her brother had taken Persephone, that her other brother, the king of gods, Persephone's own father, had given permission for the kidnapping, that the entire family had conspired to take the one thing Demeter loved most in the world. What do you do with that information? What do you do when you learn that the people who were supposed to protect your child instead betrayed her, when the system you're part of, the cosmic order you helped establish, treats your daughter as property to be traded between gods without her consent or yours? When the king of gods himself, your brother, the one who supposedly rules with justice and wisdom, thinks it's acceptable to give your child away like she's a possession rather than a person? Demeter could have raged, could have attacked Zeus directly, could have started a war that would have torn Olympus apart. But she understood something that the other gods didn't, something that would make her more dangerous than any army. She understood that she had leverage. She had power they couldn't match, couldn't replace, couldn't do without. She was the goddess of the harvest, and if she stopped working, everyone starved. So she stopped. She withdrew her blessing from the earth. She walked away from her divine duties and disguised herself as an old woman, wandering among mortals, grieving openly in a way that goddesses weren't supposed to grieve. She went to Eleusis, a small city that would become central to her mythology, and sat by a well, mourning. And as she mourned, As she refused to return to Olympus, refused to bless the fields, refused to allow anything to grow, the world began to die. Slowly at first, seeds planted but not sprouting, crops that should mature staying stunted and small. Then faster, plants withering, fields turning brown, trees losing leaves out of season, animals dying for lack of food, humans starving, children with distended bellies and hollow eyes, the strong becoming weak, the weak dying, an entire world held hostage by one mother's grief, by one goddess's refusal to participate in a system that had stolen her daughter. The other gods noticed, of course. How could they not? Humanity was dying, which meant sacrifices were stopping, which meant the gods were losing the worship and offerings they depended on. Not for survival. Gods don't need sacrifices to live, but for relevance, for connection to the mortal world, for the acknowledgement that they mattered. And more immediately, humans were praying desperately for help, begging the gods to make crops grow, to end the famine, to save them from starvation. But the gods couldn't help. They couldn't make Demeter bless the fields. They couldn't override her divine domain. They could send rain, but rain without Demeter's blessing just created mud. They could shine sun, but sun without her permission just baked the earth harder. They needed her, and she knew it, and she used that knowledge as a weapon against them. Zeus sent messengers to Demeter. Every god on Olympus came to her, one by one, offering gifts and honors and promises if she would just end the famine, just return to her duties, just let the world live again. And Demeter refused them all. She made her terms clear: return my daughter or nothing grows. Ever. Not negotiations, not compromise, not some political solution where everyone saves face and life goes on. Return Persephone or humanity dies and the gods lose their worshippers and the world ends not with war or catastrophe, but with slow starvation and the silence of extinct civilizations. That was her offer. That was her ultimatum, and it was beautiful in its simplicity, terrible in its effectiveness, and absolutely unprecedented in divine politics. Because Demeter wasn't playing by the rules. She wasn't following protocols or respecting hierarchies or acknowledging Zeus's authority. She was using the one power she had that he couldn't counter, the power to withdraw her labor, the power to stop doing the essential work that everyone took for granted, the power to make her absence mean more than anyone else's presence. Zeus tried to resist. Of course he tried. He was king of gods. He didn't negotiate with his siblings when they made demands. He commanded, he ruled, he expected obedience. But Demeter wasn't disobedient. She wasn't rebellious. She was simply done. She wasn't attacking anyone or breaking any rules or committing any crime. She was just refusing to work. And that refusal, that simple withdrawal, that act of saying, no, not until you fix what you broke, was more powerful than any rebellion. Because Zeus could defeat an army, he could crush a revolt, he could chain someone who attacked him directly. But he couldn't force Demeter to care about her duties, couldn't make her bless the fields, couldn't compel her to return to work when she had decided that nothing mattered more than getting her daughter back. He had power, she had purpose. And purpose, when it's absolute, when it's willing to sacrifice everything, including itself, beats power every time. Finally, Zeus gave in. He sent Hermes, the messenger god, to the underworld with instructions for Hades. Return Persephone. Let her go. The world is dying, and we need to meet her back, and that means giving her what she wants. And Hades, who had followed the rules, who had gotten Zeus's permission to marry Persephone, who technically hadn't done anything wrong by the standards of divine politics, had to comply. But before he let Persephone go, he did something clever and cruel. He offered her pomegranate seeds, just a few seeds, food for her journey back to the surface. And Persephone, who had been in the underworld for months, who hadn't eaten anything the entire time she was imprisoned because she understood that eating the food of the dead would bind her to the underworld forever, made a choice. She ate the seeds, 6 of them in most versions of the story, 6 small seeds that would change everything.
Because there's a rule in Greek mythology, an absolute law that even gods can't break. If you eat the food of the underworld, you belong there. Part of you always stays. Persephone had eaten, which meant she couldn't fully return to her mother. The compromise was inevitable. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld with Hades, 1 month for each seed she'd eaten, and the rest of the year on Earth with Demeter. 6 months below, 6 months above. And that division, that splitting of her existence between two worlds, two gods, two identities, became the explanation for seasons. When Persephone descended to the underworld, Demeter mourned and winter came. When Persephone returned, Demeter rejoiced and spring arrived. The cycle of the year became the cycle of a daughter leaving and returning, forever. But here's the question that the myth leaves hanging in the air. The question that makes this story more than just an explanation for why seasons exist. Did Persephone eat those seeds by choice or by compulsion? Was it Hades manipulating her one last time, ensuring that even in defeat he kept part of what he'd claimed? Or was it Persephone making her own decision, choosing to bind herself to the underworld because she'd realized something during her months there, something about power and autonomy and the strange freedom that comes from being queen of the dead? The myths don't agree. Some versions say Hades tricked her. Some say she ate willingly, even defiantly, choosing to claim some agency in a situation where she'd had none. Some suggest she'd come to love Hades, or at least respect him, and wanted to return. The ambiguity matters because it transforms the story from simple victimization into something more complex, more uncomfortable, more true to how trauma actually works. And Demeter, who had fought so hard to get her daughter back, who had been willing to destroy the world for the chance at reunion, had to accept a partial victory. She got Persephone back, but only part-time. She ended the famine, but only conditionally. Every year she would have to say goodbye, would have to watch her daughter descend to the underworld, would have to mourn and wait and hope for the return that would eventually come, but never felt guaranteed. She'd won her battle against Zeus and the divine order that thought it could take her daughter without consequences, but she'd lost the war of getting everything back to how it was before. Persephone was different now, changed by her time in the underworld, queen of the dead, comfortable with darkness in ways that made her less entirely her mother's daughter and more her own person, split between worlds, belonging fully to neither. This is what makes Demeter's story so devastating. The victory that isn't quite victory, the return that isn't quite return, the love that saves the world but can't save itself from loss. Demeter got what she demanded, the world survived, the famine ended, crops grew again, spring returned. But the cost of that victory was accepting that some things, once broken, can't be fully repaired. Some losses can't be completely recovered. Some relationships, once violated, never return to what they were. Persephone came back, yes, but she also left, over and over, every year, for eternity. And Demeter had to live with that, had to find a way to be grateful for 6 months while mourning the other 6, had to learn to function in a reality where her daughter existed in 2 worlds and she could only share one of them.
But let's talk about what Demeter actually accomplished, because focusing only on what she lost obscures what she won. She challenged the king of gods and won. She made Zeus bend to her will. She proved that divine authority, for all its power and thunder and cosmic importance, couldn't override a mother's determination to protect her child. She demonstrated that the essential workers, the ones doing the unglamorous labor that keeps everything functioning, have more power than the rulers if they choose to use it. She showed that withdrawal of labor is a legitimate form of resistance, that refusing to participate in a system that harms you is sometimes the most effective protest available. And she did all of this not through violence or warfare or the traditional tools of power, but through simple refusal. Through saying no and meaning it, and being willing to accept any consequence, including the world's destruction, rather than compromising on what mattered most to her. That's revolutionary. That's the kind of power that rulers fear more than armies, because you can defeat an army, but you can't defeat someone who's decided they don't care about anything except the one thing you won't give them. Demeter weaponized her grief. She turned her pain into leverage. She made her desperation into a negotiating position that even Zeus couldn't overcome. And she won concessions that should have been impossible. The return of a daughter who'd been legally married according to divine law. The reversal of a decision that Zeus himself had made.
The acknowledgement that a mother's rights mattered more than a king's authority. That's unprecedented in Greek mythology. That's a goddess with supposedly less power than her brothers, forcing them to recognize that power isn't just about who can throw lightning or start wars, it's about who's willing to let everything burn until they get justice. But there's a darker edge to Demeter's story, a question that the myths don't really address but hangs over the entire narrative. What about all the humans who died during that year of famine? The children who starved while Demeter mourned? The families that collapsed? The civilizations that fell? The countless innocent people who suffered and died because a goddess, in her grief and rage, withdrew her blessing from the world? Demeter saved humanity in the end, yes, but only after letting a significant portion of humanity die first. Only after using human suffering as a weapon against the gods. Only after demonstrating that she valued her daughter more than the entire mortal world combined. Is that evil? Is that justified? Is that the behavior of a protective mother or a deity so consumed by grief that she couldn't see past her own pain to the pain she was causing? The ancient Greeks didn't condemn Demeter for this. They understood, in a way that modern readers sometimes struggle with, that divine and human morality operate on different scales. Gods aren't bound by human ethics. Their actions have cosmic consequences that transcend individual human lives. Demeter letting people starve was terrible, yes, but from a divine perspective, she was enforcing a boundary that needed enforcing. She was saying, you cannot take what isn't yours without consequences. You cannot violate a mother's bond with her child and expect life to continue normally. You cannot treat the goddess who feeds the world as powerless and expect her to keep feeding you. The humans who died were casualties in a conflict between gods, and while their deaths were tragic, they also served a purpose. They proved that Demeter's power was real, that her ultimatum had teeth, that she wasn't bluffing when she said she'd let everything die before she backed down. This is uncomfortable to modern sensibilities. We want our heroes to be purely good, our protective mothers to protect everyone, our justified anger to harm only the guilty. But Demeter wasn't a hero. She was a mother driven to extremes by an unbearable loss. She was a goddess who discovered the limits of power when something irreplaceable was taken from her. She was a being who chose, deliberately and knowingly, to cause immense suffering because that suffering was the only language that the gods who'd wronged her would understand. She wasn't trying to be good. She was trying to get her daughter back. And she was willing to sacrifice anything, including her own moral standing, including countless innocent lives, including the world itself, to achieve that goal. That's not heroism. That's something raw, more primal, more honest about what love looks like when it's been pushed past the breaking point. And here's what the Greeks understood that we've largely forgotten. That kind of love, that absolute unwillingness to accept loss, that determination to break the world rather than live in a world without the person you love, is both terrifying and sacred. It's the force that builds civilizations and tears them down. It's the emotion that makes humans endure impossible suffering and also inflict it on others. It's the reason why parent-child bonds are treated as inviolable in most cultures, why harming someone's child is seen as crossing a line that other violations don't cross, why mothers throughout history have done extraordinary and terrible things in the name of protecting their offspring. Demeter embodied that primal force in its purest form. She showed what happens when you back maternal love into a corner, when you take the one thing a mother can't lose, when you force a choice between accepting violation and destroying everything. And her answer was clear. Everything burns before I accept this. But Demeter's story doesn't end with Persephone's return. It continues with the establishment of the Eleusinian Mysteries, one of the most important religious rites in ancient Greece. Demeter, during her time wandering as an old woman, stayed in Eleusis. The people there showed her kindness, took her in, honored her even though they didn't know she was a goddess. And when she revealed her true identity, when she returned to her divine form, she gave them a gift. The mysteries, secret religious ceremonies that promised initiates knowledge about death and rebirth, about the cycle of life and decay and renewal, about what waited beyond the grave. Thousands of people, including philosophers like Plato and military leaders like Alcibiades, were initiated into the mysteries. and every single one kept the secrets. For over 1,000 years, the Eleusinian mysteries were practiced, and nobody revealed exactly what happened during the initiation. We still don't know. The secrets died with the last initiates. But we know what the mysteries were about. Demeter's grief and Persephone's return. The cycle of death and rebirth, the promise that loss isn't final, that what descends can rise again, that winter always gives way to spring. The mysteries gave people hope that death wasn't the end, that there was something more, that the separation from loved ones was temporary, just like Persephone's separation from Demeter was temporary. This was Demeter's final gift. Not just agriculture, not just the food that sustained life, but meaning in the face of loss, hope in the face of death, the knowledge that grief is universal, that even gods experience it, and that the cycle continues despite the pain. That's what makes Demeter more than just the goddess of harvest. She's the goddess of the cycle itself, of growth and death and growth again, of losing what you love and finding ways to continue, of breaking and somehow reforming into something that can function even when you're not whole. Every spring, when Persephone returns and flowers bloom and the world comes back to life, that's Demeter's joy made manifest. Every winter, when Persephone descends and everything dies and the world turns cold and barren, that's Demeter's grief given physical form. The seasons themselves are a story about a mother and daughter, about separation and reunion, about how love endures even when it can't prevent loss. The entire annual cycle of the natural world is Demeter's emotional journey, repeated endlessly, eternally, a reminder that joy and sorrow aren't opposites, but partners in the dance of existence.
And Persephone? She became queen of the underworld. Not just Hades' wife, not just a victim who adapted to her circumstances, but a ruler with real authority. She judged souls alongside her husband. She showed mercy to those who deserved it. She administered the afterlife with wisdom and fairness. She split her existence between light and darkness, between the world of the living and the world of the dead, belonging to both and neither. She was, in many ways, the first goddess to exist in two worlds simultaneously, to hold two identities that should have been incompatible but somehow merged into something new. She was her mother's daughter in spring and summer. She was her own woman, the queen of death, in fall and winter. And that duality, that refusal to be only one thing, that insistence on claiming both worlds even though it meant never being fully home in either, made her one of the most complex and interesting figures in Greek mythology. So, when you plant seeds in spring, when you watch crops grow through summer, when you harvest in fall, when you endure winter's cold, you're participating in Demeter's story. You're living through the cycle that she and Persephone created through their separation and reunion. You're experiencing the rhythm of grief and joy, loss and return, death and rebirth that defines not just the seasons, but human existence itself. Demeter broke the world to get her daughter back, and in breaking it, in proving that love could be more powerful than divine authority, more destructive than any war, more essential than any law, she gave us a gift. The knowledge that some bonds matter more than everything else combined, that protecting what you love is worth any cost, that grief has power, that mothers, when pushed far enough, will burn the world down and rebuild it on their own terms. The fields still grow, the seasons still turn, Demeter still blesses the harvest, still allows life to emerge from soil, still feeds the world. But every year, when fall arrives and crops die and winter comes, we remember. This is what maternal grief looks like when it's given divine form. This is what happens when you take someone's child and think there won't be consequences. This is the goddess who held the entire world hostage and won, who broke reality itself and put it back together in a shape that accommodated her loss, who proved that the quiet goddess everyone took for granted was actually the most dangerous force in the cosmos, not because she wanted to be, but because she loved her daughter more than she loved anything else, and that love
absolute and uncompromising, and willing to destroy everything rather than accept violation, is the most powerful force that has ever existed. More powerful than lightning, more powerful than the sea, more powerful than death itself. The power of a mother who will not, cannot accept the loss of her child. That's Demeter. That's the goddess who broke the world and rebuilt it around her grief. And every spring, when life returns, we're living in the world she created through her refusal to surrender.